Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to the today's topic, development of the pituitary gland. Here we discuss how the pituitary gland and its various parts are formed, and we know that the pituitary gland embryologically and anatomically has been divided into two parts, that is adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis. So these two part of the pituitary gland has been derived from the various germ layer. We can see the anterior part of the pituitary gland, that is adenohypophysis, has been derived from the surface ectoderm, that is stomodium. And next we can see neurohypophysis, that is posterior part of the pituitary gland, that has been derived from the neuroectoderm. We can appreciate these things from the figure here. Here you can see this is a surface ectoderm, and this one is neuroectoderm. Later on, this part will form the neurohypophysis, and this orange colored, which has been um, symbolized to surface ectoderm, from the adenohypophysis. Next, we can see the various duration as well as the initiation of the development of these two parts of the pituitary gland. Uh, in terms of the duration, anterior pituitary gland is developed during the third week of intrauterine life from the Rothke's pouch, and the posterior pituitary gland is developed during the sixth week of intrauterine life from the infundibular process. And we can see here from the figure that this is the oral ectoderm. Mm, Here you can see this is the oral ectoderm that has been symbolized by the red line, and next is the neuroectoderm symbolized by the yellow line, and here is the downward growth of the neuroectoderm, which give rise to the infundibular process, and this is the initiation of the development of the posterior pituitary gland. And next we can see this oral ectoderm, which we had called that um, stomodium, and there is upward growth of this ectoderm that give rise to the Rothk's pouch, and this later on form the anterior pituitary gland. In the next slide, we will see that there is the detachment of the Rothk's pouch from the surface ectoderm during the second month of the intrauterine life. What happens that the Rothk's pouch, which has been arised from the surface ectoderm, later on the base of the Rothk's pouch constrict. That happens during the second month of the intrauterine life, and during its obliteration or its constriction, what happens? It get detached from this surface ectoderm and appear as a separate one. Here you can appreciate that here is the obliteration of the proximal Rothk's pouch, or the base of this Rothk's pouch, and that later it get detached from the surface ectoderm. Next, we see the cavity of the Rothk's pouch appear as an intraglandular cleft. What we can appreciate here that the Rothk's pouch has two wall, that is anterior wall and the posterior wall. Anterior wall proliferate and differentiate rapidly, while the posterior wall is thin and it proliferate relatively very slow, and due to that there is the development of the intraglandular cleft. Here in the figure you can appreciate this gap as intraglandular cleft, and here is even more clear, and you can see that this is Rothk's pouch, which has been detached from this surface ectoderm, and this detached Rothk's pouch was anterior part give rise to the pars distalis, and its posterior wall give rise to the pars intermedia, and you can appreciate that its upper part, the shells of this upper part of the Rothk's pouch, that will surround the infundibulum, and that ring-like structure is now called as pars tuberalis, which will surround this infundibulum. And this is how the Rothk's pouch give rise to the various part of the anterior pituitary gland. Next, we see what other development occurs. Here we can see that this portion, of the diencephalon or third ventricle, and the oral cavity, that is stomodium, giving rise to the pituitary gland. Here you can see this is the beginning of the growth of the infundibulum or the infundibular process, and here you can appreciate this is the outgrowth which is going, or that is evaginating the mesoderm and forming the Rathke's pouch. Here we can see even more clearly that there is the evagination of the third ventricle, and the epithelium of the oral cavity is being invaginated to the mesoderm, forming the Rathke's pouch. And later on, this uh, Rathke's pouch form the communication with the oral cavity as craniopharyngeal canal, and later on this craniopharyngeal canal get obliterated by the separation of this Rathke's pouch from the surface ectoderm. Here we can appreciate that there has been the detached form of the Rathke's pouch, which is hanging on uh, near to the um, neurohypophysis, and here is adenohypophysis. You can appreciate the anterior lobe or pars intermedia and intermediate lobe, that is pars intermedia, and in between you can see there is the intraglandular cleft or the hypothalamus cleft. And next is neurohypophysis, which has been developed from this um, imagination of the third ventricle or the infundibular process. Here is the summary of the adenohypophysis development. You can see there is the upward growth of the roof of the stomodium, forming the ectodermal diverticulum, which we called as Rothke's pouch, and this happened during the third week of the intrauterine life. And next, there is the extension of this diverticulum into the developing diencephalon, and with the extension, the base of the Rothke's pouch begin to constrict, and this constriction lead to the detachment of the Rothke's pouch from the surface ectoderm, and this happened during the second month of the intrauterine life. And next, what happens is the anterior wall of the Rothke's pouch from the pars anterior, that is called as the anterior lobe of the anterior part of the pituitary gland, or and posterior wall from the pars uh, intermedia, and both are being separated from the intraglandular cleft. Next, we can see this its anterior part grows upward along the infundibular stalk, forming the pars tuberalis, which forms the ring-like structure around the infundibulum. And here's the summary of the development of the neurohypophysis, which has been developed from the downgrowth from the floor of the third ventricle or developing diencephalon, which forms the infundibular process during the sixth week of the intrauterine life. And infundibular process comes in contact to the posterior aspect of the Rathke's pouch and fuses with it. It happens when the Rathke's pouch get detached from the surface ectoderm and come to lie near to the infundibular process, which later on forms the pars nervosa. And next, what happened? This infundibular process forms the infundibular stalk as well as pars nervosa or posterior pituitary gland. And next, what happens that the cavity of the infundibulum persists as infundibular recess of the third ventricle, and the cavity of the Rathke's pouch appear as or persist as the intraglandular cleft after the birth. And this much.